The first wrong note is small, a pause that lasts too long. Glassware sings. Forks slow. The manager smiles too wide and says he's honored tonight, honored to host greatness, honored to seal a future. His voice shakes on the word future. Everyone hears it. No one says a thing. It's an exclusive room, all dark wood and quiet music, the kind of place where the air itself has rules. The wealthy investor sits near the window, back straight, eyes sharp. He listens as the manager talks about service, partnerships, prestige. The investor nods, patient, unreadable. He taps the table twice, like a metronome only he can hear. Around them the staff move in smooth lines. Plates glide, bottles tilt. The manager keeps cutting in front of a young server to stand closer to the investor. He laughs a little too fast. He uses words he doesn't understand. He says, "We are global," like throwing a net and hoping it lands. Then the investor speaks. Not English. Mandarin. Clean. Precise. A single question, short and simple. A test dropped in the middle of the table like a stone. Silence. The manager's smile freezes, then slips. His eyes dart to the assistant. The assistant looks down. Someone coughs. A fork hits a plate, and the sound is suddenly loud. The investor repeats himself, the tone still calm, the meaning crystal for anyone who would care to know. The manager tries to bluff. "Of course," he says. "We are aligned." He nods as if nodding turns words into truth. The investor tilts his head, a small frown forming, the kind that means, "Please answer the question I asked." Phones lift an inch. Not high, not obvious. People feel that edge before a storm. The room breathes in. The manager glances toward the bar and whispers, "Where is my interpreter?" No one moves. There was no interpreter. He promised one and forgot. He repeats a phrase he heard on a layover, but gets it wrong. The vowels stumble. The investor's eyebrows rise. The manager clears his throat, tries again, worse. Sweat gathers at his hairline, right under the chandelier. His hands can't find a place. He reaches for the wine, pours with a shake, spills a thin red arc that runs like a blush across the white cloth. A couple at the next table trade looks. A busboy stops, watching. The assistant types fast, searching an app, then hides the phone like a cheat sheet. The investor waits. Not cruel, only clear. He asks a longer question now, in Mandarin again, about trust and timelines and who exactly will speak for this company when it matters. The manager opens his mouth, then closes it. He laughs a small laugh, the kind that begs to be forgiven. "We value all cultures," he says to the room, as if applause might start. It doesn't. The investor's face settles into silence. And near the kitchen door, a woman in a black apron lifts her head and listens. She moved like a shadow, quiet and steady, carrying plates as if she had carried them all her life. Nobody looked twice at her. They never did. To them she was just another uniform, another pair of hands trained to vanish when the work was done. But Alicia's mind was wide awake, and her ears caught every syllable spilling from the investor's lips. Mandarin rolled across the table with sharp elegance. The sound struck her not as foreign, but familiar, like an old song she hadn't heard in years. Her fingers tightened around the tray. She remembered nights bent over textbooks in Beijing, her dorm lit by the pale glow of a desk lamp. She remembered stumbling through her first conversations, then finding her rhythm, then one day realizing she could think in Mandarin without reaching for English first. She remembered defending her thesis in that language, professors nodding. All those years of work invisible now, folded away because the world had already written her story. Maid, nothing more. The manager's voice cracked across the silence, fake confidence spilling like broken glass. Alicia glanced up. His face was red, lips moving without sense, while the investor's expression cooled by the second. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting, forks suspended midair. It was happening right in front of her, power slipping, dignity unraveling, and she felt it like static in the air. For years she had been told to stay small, to move quietly, to never draw attention. Invisible was safe, but invisibility had a cost. It had pressed down on her shoulders every shift. Every order barked as if she were deaf. Every glance that looked through her instead of at her. Tonight, the cost felt heavier than ever. She stepped back toward the kitchen, but stopped. Her breath caught. The investor repeated his question. Slower now, deliberate. He wasn't mocking. He was waiting for someone to understand him. She did. Perfectly. The words lined up in her mind, clear and ready. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and the decision was made. She wasn't going to let the moment pass. Not this time. She set the tray down quietly on the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and straightened her back. The voices around her faded into a dull hum. The chandeliers glared down, hot on her skin, but her mind was cool, steady. She could already feel the shock that would ripple once she spoke. She knew eyes would turn, mouths would open, maybe even laughter. But she also knew the investor's face would change. Recognition, respect, and that, for once, would be enough. The manager laughed nervously again, pouring wine he couldn't pronounce. Alicia inhaled slowly, the way she used to before oral exams in Beijing. Her heart beat hard, but her voice waited, ready and strong. She stepped forward, unseen until now, carrying a secret that would break the silence wide open. The room held its breath. A murmur, then nothing. And then her voice, clear, smooth, fluent Mandarin, slipping into the silence like a blade through water. "Nin hao," she began, her tone respectful, yet confident. Head snapped toward the sound, a maid, apron tied, eyes calm, standing with a grace that made her look taller than she was. She answered the investor's question without hesitation, precise in grammar, exact in tone. The words carried years of study, memory, and pride. They landed like thunder. Gasps broke the stillness. The investor blinked, his brows lifting in surprise. For a moment he simply stared, as if trying to place her face in a world that had told him she didn't belong. Then the corner of his mouth curved, a spark of delight flickering across his eyes. "Ni shou de hin hao," he said, impressed. "You speak very well." The manager's face drained of color. He froze with the wine bottle in his hand, red liquid trembling at the rim of the glass. His lips parted, but no sound came. He looked from the investor to Alicia, then back again, like someone watching the ground vanish beneath their feet. The power that had clung to him all evening slipped away in a single sentence. Alicia didn't falter. She stood rooted, her eyes never dropping, her voice carrying softly but with authority. She answered follow-up questions, speaking of trust, of shared values, of timelines the investor had asked about. Each phrase cut deeper into the illusion of the manager's control. Each sentence widened the gap between the story told about her and the truth of who she was. The investor leaned forward, elbows on the table, hanging on her every word. He laughed warmly, the sound rich and genuine. "Finally," he said in Mandarin, "someone who understands." His delight spilled across the room. The tension cracked, replaced with something electric, unforgettable. The manager tried to smile, but it twitched. He stepped closer, muttering, "She's just the staff." His voice shook, but no one looked at him anymore. Every eye was on Alicia. She was no longer invisible. She was the center, and in that moment, captured by phones whispered about in real time, the hierarchy shattered. The maid had answered perfectly, and the world was already beginning to shift. It started as whispers, small, startled breaths slipping between tables. A couple leaned in close, murmuring, "Did you hear that?" Another guest raised his phone higher, pretending to check messages but recording every second. The sound of Mandarin flowing from Alicia's mouth traveled through the air like music no one expected. It reached corners of the room the manager could no longer control. The investor laughed, rich and genuine, the kind of laugh that breaks tension like sunlight piercing storm clouds. He spoke again, faster this time, his tone alive with curiosity. And Alicia matched him, word for word, gesture for gesture, her rhythm smooth, her voice unwavering. She wasn't nervous anymore. She was in her element, speaking a language that had once carried her through classrooms, markets and friendships oceans away. The manager tried to insert himself, nodding as if he understood, chuckling at words that meant nothing to him. But every attempt only highlighted his emptiness. Guests began to shift their chairs, leaning subtly toward Alicia, drawn like moths to flame. The waiter paused mid-step, tray trembling, eyes wide. Even the violinist in the corner slowed his bow, watching the exchange instead of his sheet music. The investor clapped softly on the table, smiling. "Your accent," he said in Mandarin, "is Beijing, isn't it?" Alicia nodded, her lips curving in a small smile. She admitted she had studied there for years. A flash of admiration crossed his face. "Beautiful," he said. "You remind me of home." His words carried warmth, respect, and something more powerful than the manager's entire evening of rehearsed charm. Phones were no longer subtle. They were out in the open now. Cameras aimed without apology. A young woman whispered, "This is going viral. I can feel it." Another muttered, "She's just staff." "No, look at her." And so the story began to write itself, frame by frame, tweet by tweet. The manager's grin thinned into a grimace. He tugged his collar, sweat marking his shirt. His hand twitched at the tablecloth as if he could pull the moment back into place. But the moment was gone. The spotlight had shifted, and it wasn't leaving. Alicia continued the conversation gracefully, not performing, just existing as herself, intelligent, capable, commanding without force. She asked thoughtful questions, translated complex phrases, and mirrored the investor's energy with natural ease. The room pulsed with recognition. They weren't just hearing words. They were watching dignity reclaim itself in real time. And as the last sentence fell from her lips, the investor leaned back, utterly at ease, utterly entertained. He looked around the table with satisfaction. "Now," he said in Mandarin, "this dinner has truly begun. Desperation makes men clumsy." The manager's smile cracked into pieces as he forced himself back into the conversation. "Well," he stammered loudly in English, "our company values diversity. We, encourage our staff to expand themselves." His words stumbled, thin and hollow. No one laughed. No one nodded. The silence that followed his statement was sharper than any insult. He leaned toward the investor, cutting across Alicia mid-sentence. "She doesn't represent us," he whispered urgently, though the room could still hear. "She's just staff. She cleans tables." His tone dripped with a panic he couldn't mask, each word an attempt to build a wall between them and her. The investor turned slowly, eyes narrowing, the warmth fading. "Just staff?" he repeated in Mandarin, then again in English for the table. The phrase cut through the air like a knife. Guests stiffened. A woman at the corner table raised her eyebrows in disbelief. "Did he really just say that?" she muttered under her breath. Alicia stood quiet, hands clasped before her apron, face calm. She didn't need to argue. The manager was unraveling himself without her saying a word. She let the silence do the work, her composure highlighting his desperation. The manager scrambled. "Look, she speaks well. Yes, but she doesn't understand the business side. I am the one you need to deal with." His hand slapped the table lightly, as if pounding truth into existence. But the investor only chuckled, not with joy this time, but with irony. "She understands more than you've shown me all night," he replied in Mandarin. The room rippled with low laughter, not cruel but knowing. The investor gestured toward Alicia, inviting her to continue. She did, softly, fluidly, effortlessly reclaiming the conversation. Every phrase she spoke drew more admiration. Every nod from the investor deepened the humiliation of the man who should have been leading. The manager fumbled for notes, pulling out documents, numbers, buzzwords. None of it mattered. No one cared anymore. His cheeks burned crimson. He muttered excuses about being tired, about needing clarification, about cultural differences. But the truth was clear. He had dismissed brilliance standing 2 feet away from him for years, blind to it until it exploded into view before his client and his peers. A guest at another table shook his head. "Arrogance," he whispered. "This is what it looks like." Phones kept recording. Every twitch of the manager's jaw, every bead of sweat on his temple, every interruption, it was all captured. By the time dessert menus arrived, the investor wasn't looking at him at all. Every question, every laugh, every nod went to Alicia. And the more the manager tried to claw his way back into relevance, the more invisible he became. Long before the final course, the story had already left the room. A student at the corner table uploaded the first clip to Twitter. Just 14 seconds of a maid speaking flawless Mandarin, while the manager floundered. The caption read, "This is why you never underestimate people." Within minutes, it hit 1,000 views. Then 10,000. Across the city, phones buzzed. Screens lit up with the sight of Alicia standing in her apron, voice calm and precise, while the manager sweated and stumbled. Comments poured in. "Chills. I want her story. This is bigger than just language. Inside the restaurant, more diners joined in. A businessman discreetly tilted his phone, catching a wider shot of the investor smiling at Alicia. Another guest posted live. Manager tries to dismiss her as just staff. Investor not having it. The manager, oblivious at first, kept trying to salvage dignity. But the glow of phones reflected in glasses betrayed the truth. He was being recorded from every angle. His fall was already public property. When he finally noticed, his eyes flickered with dread. He leaned close to the assistant, whispering, "Tell them to stop." But it was too late. The internet had already claimed him. At the investors' table, laughter rang warm. As Alicia explained a proverb in Mandarin, translating its deeper meaning into English for everyone. Guests clapped softly, charmed. One muttered, "I can't believe she was invisible until tonight." Another replied, "Not anymore." Their words too found their way online, captioned on video, fueling the storm. Outside, trending pages filled with screenshots. Journalists circled like hawks. Headlines writing themselves, "Maid stuns with Mandarin. Manager humiliated in viral clip." By the time dessert arrived, Alicia's name wasn't known yet, but her face was everywhere. Inside, she carried herself with quiet composure, unaware of the millions already watching. She wasn't trying to perform. She was simply being herself. That authenticity, calm, unshaken, radiant with dignity, was what made the clips explode. People weren't just watching a surprise talent, they were watching justice in its purest form. The overlooked finally seen. And while the room buzzed with admiration, the manager sat hollow, his phone vibrating endlessly in his pocket. He didn't need to check it to know. His panic had gone viral. When the dinner ended, the investor did not leave right away. He pushed back his chair, stood tall, and asked softly, "May I speak with you?" Alicia froze, tray still in her hands. For a moment she thought he meant the manager, but his eyes were fixed only on her. The manager stumbled forward, desperate to reclaim ground. "Of course, sir. But the investor held up his hand, silencing him with a glance colder than steel. "Not you," he said. "Her." They stepped aside into a quieter corner of the restaurant. The chandeliers glowed faintly above, and the murmur of guests faded into background hum. Alicia clasped her apron nervously, unsure if she had crossed a line she could never return from. The investor smiled gently, his voice lowering into something personal, genuine. "Your Mandarin," he said, still in the language they shared, "is not only correct. It is alive. Tell me, how did you learn?" Alicia hesitated, then began. She spoke of long nights in Beijing, of scholarships hard won, of professors who once told her she had a gift for understanding culture as much as language. She explained the years she spent navigating foreign streets, laughing with classmates from across the world, translating for friends in crowded markets. Her words carried weight not of pride, but of quiet endurance. She confessed she had applied for positions in business, diplomacy, even international trade. But every door had closed, sometimes politely, sometimes with silence. The only open door had been this one, into the kitchen. The investor listened without interruption. His eyes did not flicker with doubt or pity. They shone with recognition, as if he had been searching for someone exactly like her, and had finally found her in the unlikeliest of places. "You understand more than language," he said slowly. "You understand people. That is rarer than you know." Her throat tightened. Years of being unseen rushed through her in a wave. She swallowed hard and nodded, unsure how to respond. For once, someone important wasn't dismissing her. He was seeing her. The manager lurked nearby, face taut, but he dared not interrupt again. He understood too late that the spotlight had shifted forever. The investor extended his hand with warmth. "I would like to stay in touch. You have extraordinary potential. Do not hide it anymore." She looked at his hand, then into his eyes and accepted. A single handshake sealed what the manager had thrown away, a chance to value brilliance when it first appeared. Whispers spread faster than wine stains. By morning the staff knew what had happened. Some told the story with pride, how Alicia had spoken Mandarin better than anyone expected. Others whispered in fear, certain the manager would find a way to punish her. In the break room, voices lowered when she entered. Some smiled, quick and supportive. Others looked away, scared of being caught in the fallout. The manager, however, was anything but subtle. He cornered her near the lockers, jaw tight, voice low. "Don't you ever embarrass me again," he hissed. His finger jabbed the air, trembling with rage. "You think you were clever? You crossed a line. Stay in your place." She met his glare calmly, refusing to shrink. She didn't answer, but her silence was stronger than words. He stormed away, muttering about consequences. But outside those walls, silence had already been broken. Clips from the dinner swarmed across social media. The manager's interruptions, his condescending remark, "just staff," were dissected frame by frame. By noon, headlines ran with sharp edges. Maid silences manager in Mandarin showdown. Arrogance meets its match. Reporters called the restaurant demanding statements. Emails stacked up, subject lines screaming for answers. "Care to explain your manager's comments? Is this your company's culture? Will the woman in the video face retaliation?" The restaurant's PR inbox flooded faster than it could be emptied. Meanwhile, Alicia's phone buzzed endlessly. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years messaged, stunned by what they'd seen. Strangers sent encouragement. "You're inspiring. You gave me chills." "They can't silence you now." She scrolled in disbelief, her hands shaking, heart racing with both fear and hope. The manager tried to contain it. He told staff not to post, not to share, not to speak. But the dam had already burst. Every order only fueled suspicion. Every attempt to silence the story made it louder. The scandal wasn't fading, it was growing. And as the sun set, news crews parked outside the restaurant, cameras ready. The storm was no longer brewing. It had already arrived. By midnight, the internet was ablaze. The clip had been viewed over 2 million times. Comment sections overflowed. "That woman is a queen. Fire the manager immediately. How many Alicias are out there?" The video was reposted with translations, captions, and think pieces dissecting every detail. One journalist wrote, "This wasn't just about language. It was about respect, long denied and suddenly reclaimed." Podcasts debated it. Morning shows ran segments before sunrise. A cultural critic tweeted, "A maid spoke Mandarin. A manager showed arrogance. Guess which one had power?" The post gained 500,000 likes in hours. Hashtags exploded across platforms. Respect her top trends worldwide. Not just staff followed close behind. Memes surfaced, pairing the manager's red face with captions mocking his ignorance. Alicia's calm gaze, by contrast, became a symbol shared across timelines. Her photo edited into artwork, posters, even murals sketched online. But beyond jokes, there was substance. Discussions of systemic bias filled threads. People asked how often brilliance is buried beneath uniforms and job titles. Stories poured in. Nurses with engineering degrees, janitors fluent in 5 languages, waiters with law diplomas. Alicia's moment had opened a floodgate. Meanwhile, calls for accountability grew. Name the manager. What's the company's response? Where is justice for her? The restaurant chain's silence only poured gasoline on the fire. Each hour without acknowledgement added fury. Alicia watched in awe, reading messages until her eyes blurred. She saw strangers defending her, lifting her story higher than she ever imagined. But with admiration came fear. "They'll come after you," one friend warned. "They'll try to bury this," another said. "Stay strong. The world is with you." The world was indeed watching, dissecting, demanding. Then somewhere in a boardroom far from her apartment, executives felt the pressure rising like water in a sinking ship. The CEO of the restaurant chain began his day with irritation. He had dozens of emails marked urgent, all with the same subject, viral incident. He skimmed one, dismissing it as exaggeration. But then another arrived, this time from a longtime investor. "Watch this now. Handle it fast." With a sigh, he clicked the link. The video filled his screen, a maid in an apron, speaking flawless Mandarin, calm and commanding, while his manager sweated and muttered. The words "just staff" cut through the speakers. He watched the investor's delighted laugh, the staff's wide eyes, the phones raised high. The silence that followed the manager's humiliation pressed against the room, even through the screen. By the end, the CEO sat back, lips pressed thin. This was no exaggeration. This was disaster. He replayed the clip twice, watching the body language. The manager's interruptions looked worse each time. Alicia's dignity, in contrast, looked stronger. He scrolled down to comments, thousands of them demanding action. His inbox pinged again. Another headline appeared on his phone. Corporate arrogance exposed at dinner. He exhaled sharply. The public wasn't waiting for his decision. They were already writing his company's story. He called his communications director immediately. How bad is it? She didn't sugarcoat. International. Trending in 3 countries. Reporters outside our flagship location. They want answers yesterday. He rubbed his temple. What about the manager? She paused. He's blaming the maid. But cameras don't lie. It's clear who carried herself with respect and who didn't. The CEO leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He had seen scandals before, but this was different. This wasn't theft or poor service. This was deeper questions of dignity, equity, image. It cut at the heart of what his brand claimed to represent. If he stayed silent, the company would sink under public outrage. If he acted too slowly, it would look like cowardice. He needed to move, and he needed to move now. The summons came by email first, then phone. Report to headquarters. Immediately. The manager arrived pale, tie crooked, eyes darting. He tried to mask his fear with forced bravado. In the boardroom, executives sat in a stiff line, screens glowing with clips they had all watched too many times. Explain yourself, one said. He launched into excuses. He claimed Alicia had overstepped, that she had embarrassed the company by speaking without permission. He called it insubordination, but the executives pulled up surveillance footage, unfiltered, it showed every moment, his fumbling, his dismissive words, his desperate interruptions. His argument collapsed with each passing second. He tried another angle. She tricked us, she hid her skills. A vice president shook her head. Or you never bothered to see them. The words landed heavy, final. He shifted, sweating through his shirt. I was under pressure, he muttered. It was one night. One mistake, but the clips had become symbols. This wasn't just about one mistake anymore. It was about what he represented. Screens flashed with headlines. Arrogance in a suit, respect in an apron. Manager humiliated worldwide. His name trended alongside hashtags demanding his resignation. He was no longer a man defending himself. He was the villain in a story watched by millions. The CEO entered quietly, carrying a silence that silenced even the excuses. He sat at the head of the table, eyes fixed. You've made yourself a symbol, he said flatly, and not the kind this company survives. The manager opened his mouth, but the words withered before they came. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, he realized he wasn't going to talk his way out. He had become the cautionary tale. While the manager scrambled, the internet turned its gaze toward Alicia. Journalists dug deep, piecing together the life of the woman who had stunned a millionaire. They found scholarship records, old university bulletins, photos of her at Beijing ceremonies, grinning with classmates. Articles painted her journey vividly. Daughter of a working-class family, awarded scholarships against all odds, thriving overseas, then returning home only to find doors closed by bias and prejudice, applications unanswered, interviews cut short, jobs denied again and again, until finally, uniform pressed, she entered the restaurant world. Brilliance tucked away in silence. Readers devoured the story. She wasn't just a maid, one headline declared. She was a scholar in hiding. The narrative shifted from shock to outrage. How could someone with so much skill be pushed aside? And how many others lived that same story? Talents wasted because society refused to look closer. Alicia herself stayed quiet, overwhelmed by requests for comment. She scrolled articles, tears stinging her eyes. To see her life laid out, her struggles exposed for strangers. It was terrifying, but messages from around the world flooded in. You are proof. You give me hope. They can't bury you again. And somewhere, in the middle of that storm, Alicia realized the truth. She was no longer invisible. It began with a whisper, then a message, then a post that spread like fire in dry grass. The young waiter wrote anonymously online. She's not the only one. We've all been dismissed here. We've all been silenced. The words struck a nerve. Within hours, cooks, dishwashers, cleaners began adding their own voices. Some spoke of schedules cut without warning, insults hurled in backroom, promotions promised then denied. Stories piled up until the scandal was no longer one dinner gone wrong. It was a pattern of exploitation stitched into the company's fabric. Inside the restaurant, courage spread like a fever. One dishwasher told a journalist about being laughed at when he suggested a safer cleaning method. A server shared how managers mocked her accent when she greeted guests. A line cook confessed that he'd been told customers didn't want to see people like him up front. Each story echoed Alicia's in its own way. Dignity trampled, talent ignored, humanity stripped for convenience. For years these workers had endured quietly, convinced speaking up meant losing everything. But the viral clip had cracked something open. Alicia's calm defiance gave them a glimpse of what was possible, being heard. And once one voice was heard, others refused to stay quiet. Spoke to reporters outside, to activists who rallied online, to customers who asked pointed questions. Some even filmed short videos, faces bare, saying this happened to me too. The chain tried to contain it. Press releases insisted the incident was isolated, but the flood of testimonies made that impossible. What was once framed as one man's mistake now looked like systemic rot. Silence was no longer protection. It was proof of guilt. Customers began canceling reservations. Protesters stood outside holding signs. Respect your staff. Not just Alicia. Hashtag shifted. We are all Alicia trended worldwide. The movement was no longer about one woman. It was about every unseen worker forced to shrink so others could shine. In the break room, Alicia found herself surrounded. Waiters clapped her on the back. A cook said softly, "You gave us courage." A cleaner, older and weary, squeezed her hand. "We've been waiting for someone to stand tall." "You did." She felt the weight of it, not fame, but responsibility. She nodded, promising herself she wouldn't let their courage be wasted. The chorus of voices grew so loud that even the boardrooms could no longer pretend not to hear. When the Chinese investor finally broke his silence, the world listened. At a press conference arranged days later, cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium. He was measured, deliberate, his reputation giving each word the weight of stone. On that evening, he said in Mandarin before switching to English, there was only one person in that room who truly represented competence. And it was not the manager. The room buzzed instantly. Reporters leaned forward, pens flying. He went on, praising Alicia not just for her flawless Mandarin, but for the composure she carried under pressure. She met me with respect. She understood not only my words but my meaning. That is rare. That is leadership. His admiration was clear, his disappointment sharper still. He called the manager's arrogance a disgrace, and warned that any business unable to recognize talent in its own ranks was doomed to fail. The quotes made headlines within minutes. Around the world, networks replayed the clip. Anchors emphasized how extraordinary it was for an investor of his stature to single out a maid over a manager. Social media erupted again, this time with translations of his speech. One viral caption read, "Even the billionaire saw her worth. Why didn't they?" Memes carried his words across platforms, paired with Alicia's calm expression. The restaurant chain's leadership squirmed. They had hoped the storm might pass if they waited, but the investor's public endorsement tipped the balance entirely. Now it wasn't just angry customers demanding answers. It was global business leaders asking why the company didn't value its people. Silence was no longer an option. Every shareholder, every partner wanted to know what steps would be taken. For Alicia, the moment was surreal. Watching the press conference on her phone, she heard him speak of her with respect she had never imagined receiving. It wasn't flattery, it was recognition. Her eyes stung. She turned off the screen, sat still, and whispered, "Finally." When the interview request came, Alicia almost said no. She didn't want the spotlight, didn't crave fame. But the voices around her, friends, co-workers, strangers who now saw her as a symbol, urged her to speak. "If you don't tell your story," one said gently, "they'll twist it." The cameras rolled in a quiet studio. Across from her, the interviewer asked softly, "What was going through your mind that night?" Alicia smiled faintly, her hands folded in her lap. "I wasn't thinking about going viral. I just couldn't watch someone treat respect as if it didn't matter." Her voice was calm. No anger, no bitterness, just clarity. She spoke of her years in Beijing, of scholarships earned, of coming home to rejection after rejection. I wasn't invisible because I lacked skills, she said. I was invisible because people decided not to see me. The words hung heavy in the air. Millions would later replay them, quoting them as if they were poetry. But she refused to let the story become only about revenge. I don't want this to be about tearing someone down, she said firmly. It should be about lifting people up. We should look closer at the people around us. You'd be amazed at what brilliance has been ignored. Her quiet strength radiated through the lens. Viewers felt it, not a victim's anger, but a leader's grace. When the interview aired, the internet exploded again. Clips circulated instantly. She didn't raise her voice once, but she shook the world, one tweet said. Another read, "This is how dignity speaks." Her phrases became hashtags. Students quoted her in essays. Activists painted her words on protest signs. The interview didn't just trend, it solidified her as a global figure of resilience. At home, Alicia turned off the TV and exhaled deeply. For the first time, she felt her truth had been spoken in full. The announcement came with the weight of inevitability. The restaurant released a statement early Monday morning. Effective immediately, the manager in question is no longer employed with our company. The word spread instantly. Screens lighting up with headlines. His name, already infamous, was now tied permanently to his downfall. The decision wasn't framed as justice. It was survival. Shareholders had threatened to pull out. Customers were boycotting. Employees were speaking to reporters daily. Keeping him on had become a liability too costly to bear. And so his career collapsed with the click of a send button. At home, he sat staring at the news alert on his phone, mouth dry, hands trembling. Messages poured in. Some from old colleagues distancing themselves. Others mocking. Still others angry at what he had done. He tried to tell himself he had been misunderstood, but the videos said otherwise. They showed arrogance, ignorance, dismissal. They showed him. Online, memes flooded timelines. His face beside captions like, "How not to lead." College professors used him as an example in lectures about workplace bias. Podcasters dissected his every word. He was no longer a manager. He was a lesson. Meanwhile, staff at the restaurant felt a ripple of relief. In the break room, someone whispered, "He's gone." Applause broke out. Laughter followed. It wasn't triumph, it was release. The weight of fear lifting at last. For the first time in years, they believed change was possible. Alicia heard the news while folding laundry at home. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the screen. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She only whispered softly, "It had to be done." Her quiet dignity never wavered, and that was the sharpest contrast of all. His fall, her rise, both written into history by the same night. The company could no longer stall. The scandal had grown beyond headlines, beyond hashtags. Investors demanded answers. Customers threatened boycotts, and workers threatened walkouts. Something had to change. And so, under the weight of public pressure, the chain announced sweeping reforms. For critics, it wasn't enough. For workers, it was overdue. For Alicia, it was proof that one moment could shake an entire institution. She walked into work days later to see the plaque bolted near the host's stand. Customers paused to read it. Staff smiled faintly as they passed. The air felt different, not fixed, not perfect, but shifted. The reforms were not about one woman anymore. They were about the countless others who had endured silence for years. The story had forced the company to reckon with its failures, and in doing so, to rewrite its future. The investor made his stance clear. "If we are to move forward," he said firmly, "she must be in the room." The board shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared argue. And so, Alicia, once the maid clearing plates at the edge of the room, was invited into boardrooms she had never imagined entering. The first meeting felt surreal. She sat at a long, polished table, across from executives in tailored suits. For a moment, she almost reached for a tray out of habit. Then she steadied herself, straightened her shoulders, and opened her notebook instead. When the investor spoke, he turned to her. When cultural nuances were discussed, it was her voice that carried clarity. She translated phrases, yes, but she also translated meaning, bridging worlds with ease. Executives listened, scribbling notes. For the first time, her knowledge was currency. The investor smiled often, as though proud of his insistence. The manager who once dismissed her was gone. Now every eye was on the woman who had replaced him in influence without raising her voice. She was no longer a maid in the corner. She was seated at the center of power, shaping conversations, reshaping respect. The reforms did not stay contained within the company. Other industries watched closely. Nervous and alert, articles appeared in business journals. How one viral clip sparked corporate reform. Analysts noted the speed with which silence became liability. How dignity became market value. Executives across sectors began asking new questions. What if our staff are overlooked talents? What would happen if they spoke? Stories surfaced in other workplaces. A janitor revealed he spoke 5 languages fluently. A receptionist shared her engineering degree. A delivery driver disclosed his law diploma. The internet amplified them all, framing them as hidden brilliance buried by prejudice. Alicia's story had become more than inspiration. It had become precedent. Activists seized the moment, demanding accountability from companies notorious for exploitation. Politicians cited her name in speeches about equity and representation. We cannot afford to waste talent by pretending not to see it. One lawmaker declared. Editorials praised her calm dignity, contrasting it with the collapse of arrogance. Scholars began calling it the Alicia effect, the undeniable proof that dignity, when amplified, can bend institutions. For Alicia, the attention was overwhelming. She walked carefully, refusing interviews she didn't trust, speaking softly when she did. But everywhere she looked, she saw the ripples. A cafe displaying its own dignity charter. A clothing retailer rolling out cultural training. A student holding a sign that read, "We are all more than they see." She realized this was no longer about her alone. She had become a quiet catalyst for systemic change. What began as one dinner now reshaped conversations across the nation. And in boardrooms far removed from that night, executives whispered her name like both a warning and a guide. Weeks later, she returned to the place where it all began. There were no cameras this time. No crowd pressing for footage. Just Alicia, walking steadily up the familiar steps of the restaurant that had once been her cage. The evening air smelled of rain. The pavement shining faintly under the streetlights. At the entrance, the plaque gleamed in polished bronze. This space belongs to dignity, equality, and respect. She stopped, tracing the words with her eyes. Guests paused to read it, some nodding, some snapping photos. She smiled softly, then pushed the door open. Inside, the staff greeted her differently now. No longer a shadow, no longer invisible. Waiters nodded with quiet admiration. A hostess bowed slightly, whispering, "Welcome back." Even the kitchen seemed to hum with different energy, lighter. The weight that had once pressed down on everyone here was gone. She walked through the dining room slowly, past polished tables, past the corner where she once carried trays unnoticed. Patrons glanced up, recognizing her face from headlines. But no one intruded. Respect lingered in their silence. She passed the spot where the manager had fumbled his lies, the chair where the investor had laughed with joy. The memories flashed like echoes, but they no longer carried pain. They carried The investor himself was not there that night, nor were reporters. This wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about closure, about claiming the space not as a maid who had once been dismissed, but as the woman whose quiet power had remade its rule. She reached the far end of the room, paused, and turned. Staff stood straighter. Diners watched with reverence. And Alicia, no longer burdened by invisibility, simply kept walking, her presence louder than any applause. She walked past without pause. Her legacy written not in noise but in silence that demanded respect. The city moved as it always did, cars rushing, lights glowing, voices overlapping. Yet when Alicia walked down the street, something subtle shifted. Strangers noticed her. Some nodded respectfully. Children pointed, whispering to their parents. Workers paused mid-shift, eyes brightening with recognition. No one shouted. No one swarmed. They simply acknowledged her with quiet reverence, as if they knew they were in the presence of someone who had changed more than one life, someone who had shifted history. She carried herself the same way she always had. Calm, composed, step steady. She wore no crown, no special attire, just herself. But dignity radiated from her like sunlight. People whispered her story not as gossip but as guidance. That's the woman who reminded the world to look closer. One man told his daughter. A young student held up a notebook, her words copied on the first page. I wasn't invisible because I lacked skills. I was invisible because people decided not to see me. Policies shifted across industries. Training programs bore her name. Companies adopted charters that echoed the plaque outside the restaurant. Activists cited her as proof. Legislators pointed to her story when drafting reforms. But for Alicia, none of it was about fame. It was about making sure silence never again protected arrogance, and invisibility never again erased brilliance. As she passed a mural painted on a brick wall, a portrait of her, eyes lifted, words beneath reading "Quiet Power." She stopped only for a moment. Children laughed and pointed at the image, then looked at her, astonished that the figure in paint was walking among them. She smiled, waved gently, and kept moving. The world no longer needed headlines. It no longer needed hashtags. Her legacy was alive in the nods of strangers, in the respect etched into policy, in the quiet power that lingered wherever dignity was defended. What began as humiliation had ended as transformation. And Alicia, once invisible, had become history. Not loud, not boastful, but unforgettable.